Stop and listen, because this is the kind of scenario that would snap a political era in half. Not a poll shift, not a bad interview, not even a scandal. A moment where the president's own party decides the risk is too high and the protection is over. Imagine the U.S. Senate in open turmoil. Imagine Republicans and Democrats moving together, not for a messaging stunt, not to posture on television, but to begin removal proceedings against a sitting president. Imagine longtime defenders quietly turning into prosecutors. And the reason isn't ideology or personality, it's national security. That's the frame for what follows. Not a claim that this is happening, but an explanation of what it would look like if it did. What would have to be true for 18 Republican senators to join Democrats in advancing impeachment-related action, and why the catalyst would almost certainly be a classified intelligence disclosure that made party loyalty feel like complicity. Because in modern Washington, senators don't break ranks like that unless the evidence is strong enough to protect them from their own base. And when the Senate Majority Whip, committee chairs, and high-profile loyalists fracture, it means something has shifted at a structural level. The coalition that kept the president safe is no longer confident it can survive by staying loyal. Here's the first thing to understand. Impeachment doesn't normally begin in the Senate. It begins in the House. The House has the sole power of impeachment. The Senate has the sole power to try all impeachments. That division matters. It exists to prevent exactly what you're imagining, senators running their own impeachment process. So how could a Senate revolt still be real? Through two pathways. First, Senate Republicans can publicly call for impeachment and pressure the House to act while beginning parallel Senate actions like censures, war powers constraints, or legislative restrictions that box in the president. Second, Senate leaders can prepare for the trial phase, coordinate with investigators, and signal to the House that conviction is viable, making impeachment in the House more likely because it stops being symbolic. In other words, the Senate can't impeach by itself, but it can make impeachment inevitable by making conviction plausible. And that is the kind of earthquake that would end a presidency politically even before a formal vote occurs. So what would cause that? The most likely trigger is not a policy dispute. It's not tariffs or executive orders. It's not a personality clash. It would be something that turns the issue from political to existential. Allegations that the president traded classified information for personal benefit, or compromised intelligence capabilities in a way that puts lives at risk. That kind of accusation doesn't just offend, it terrifies. Because senators who sit on intelligence and armed services committees understand what the public often doesn't. When sources and methods are compromised, people die. Allies stop sharing. Adversaries change behavior. The damage is permanent. And it becomes even worse if the allegation involves a quid pro quo, national security for business advantage. That is the moment where policy disagreement becomes corruption at the level of state power. If that is the accusation, the next question is obvious. What evidence would a classified briefing need to contain for senators to move? Not vague suspicions, not people are saying. It would need a layered package, multiple forms of corroboration that reinforce each other. Communications intelligence, intercepts, transcripts, metadata, or recorded calls. Financial intelligence, banking trails, wires, beneficial ownership. Witness testimony, officials who observed the conduct or were instructed to facilitate it. Documentation of internal reporting, whistleblower channels, inspector general referrals. timeline integrity, events lining up in a way that is hard to explain innocently. Prosecutors think in layers. So do senators who have been briefed on intelligence cases. They know what one source looks like, and they know what 4 sources that point the same way looks like. That's why the briefing scenario matters. In this hypothetical, picture a mandatory classified briefing in the Senate's secure facility. Directors of intelligence agencies present the material. Senators arrive, expecting another tense session. Then they're shown something that changes the room. Something specific enough that it's no longer a matter of interpretation. And afterward, senators don't do what politicians usually do. They don't spin. They don't smile. They don't rush to cameras with talking points. They look shaken because they've been shown information that can't be tweeted away. In a moment like that, the political instinct divides into 2 groups. Group 1, the loyalists who instinctively protect the president no matter what. Group 2, the institutionalists who may have tolerated chaos but cannot tolerate what looks like national betrayal. And if Group 2 includes high-profile Republicans, the dam can break. Because once senior Republicans say out loud, "This crosses the line," it gives cover to everyone else who was waiting for someone else to move first. That's how revolt becomes real. Not with one brave senator, but with collective movement. Imagine the emergency meeting afterward, not a regular caucus, a secure room gathering of concerned Republicans. They shut the door because they're discussing classified material and because they're deciding what loyalty now means. In these rooms, the conversation is rarely emotional at first. It's procedural. It's about exposure. What happens if we do nothing? What happens if this becomes public through leaks and we are seen as covering it up? What happens if allies pull intelligence cooperation because they believe the U.S. president monetized secrets? What happens if the next briefing includes casualty estimates? That's the hidden engine of these decisions, not morality, but consequence. Then someone says the thing that forces the room to decide. If we don't act, we become part of it. That's when the meeting changes tone. In a plausible scenario, a Republican senator who has been cautious for years, someone seen as institutional, frames it bluntly. If we excuse this, we're telling future presidents that there is no limit. And then, if the revolt is truly historic, a loyal defender cracks. Not a critic, not an enemy, a defender. That moment is what changes the math, because it signals to the base and to the party, this is not a fake crisis invented by opponents. This is internal. This is real. This is serious. From there, the tactical plan would look like this. First, produce a public statement that stays within classification rules but communicates gravity. The Senate has been briefed on conduct that appears to threaten national security and involves personal benefit. Oversight and accountability will follow. Second, coordinate with the House, because the House must impeach. Senate leaders can't skip the Constitution, but they can send a message. If the House impeaches, conviction is possible. That message changes everything. Third, begin preparing the Senate machinery, rules for trial, security protocols for classified evidence, witness procedures, and coordination with intelligence agencies on what can be disclosed and how. Fourth, protect the coalition. This is crucial. Authoritarians survive by isolating opponents and punishing them one at a time. Revolts succeed when members move together and promise mutual defense, political, financial, and procedural. If 18 Republicans are truly committed, they would likely have worked out an internal pact. We hold, we don't break, we don't let Trump pick us off with threats. The goal is to prevent intimidation from dissolving the coalition. Now, what happens to the president in this scenario? The president faces a bind that is almost impossible to escape. If he denies everything, and the evidence later becomes partially public or is described in credible detail by senators, he looks like he is lying. If he admits sharing information but claims it was authorized, he still faces the question of motive and benefit. I had the power is not a defense to corruption. And claiming I declassified it doesn't automatically erase wrongdoing if the allegation is personal gain. If he attacks the senators, he might energize his base, but he also gives more Republicans a reason to break. Because the moment you call your own party traitors, you turn removal from betrayal into self-defense. That's what makes these moments so dangerous for presidents who rely on fear. Their instinct to bully becomes counterproductive once the coalition is already forming. Now layer in the legal reality. Impeachment is political, but it interacts with criminal exposure in indirect ways. Impeachment can surface evidence. It can create sworn testimony. It can force documents into congressional custody. It can trigger inspector general referrals. And if a president is removed, the ordinary shields of office weaken. That doesn't guarantee prosecution, but it changes the environment. Also, classified evidence creates its own paradox. The most convincing proof may be impossible to show to the public. Senators may say it's ironclad, but the public can't see it. That creates a credibility contest. The system relies on senators being trusted as guardians of classified truth, and trust is fragile. Which is why bipartisan movement matters. If only one party claims to have seen damning evidence, the other party says it's politics. If both parties say it, the public has fewer places to hide. That's the underlying reason a bipartisan coalition is so powerful. Now consider the governance consequences while this is happening. A president under imminent removal threat becomes weaker in real time. Cabinet officials start thinking about their own futures. Agency heads begin limiting risk. Foreign leaders recalibrate. The bureaucracy becomes cautious. Military and intelligence officials become hyper-defensive about information flows. Even allies start asking, is it safe to share? And Congress, when consumed by an impeachment fight, stops doing other things. Confirmations slow, budgets stall, legislation freezes. The country enters a constitutional focus mode where everything becomes about the trial. That's why these moments aren't just political news. They are governance shocks. So how would the Senate trial handle classified evidence? In a true national security impeachment scenario, much of the evidence would be handled in closed session. Senators with clearance can review materials. The public might only see declassified summaries or general descriptions. Witnesses may testify behind closed doors. The Chief Justice may preside. Strict protocols would be set. This is not unusual in principle. Congress handles classified material regularly, but it is unusual in scale for an impeachment trial. And that scale raises a second question. Will senators be willing to vote to remove based on evidence the public cannot fully see? That's why statements from respected senators matter so much. It becomes a referendum on institutional credibility. Now, zoom out to the broader constitutional stake. Impeachment exists for high crimes and misdemeanors. That phrase is misunderstood. It doesn't require a criminal conviction. It refers to abuse of power, betrayal of public trust, conduct incompatible with office. The classic founder's fear was the president selling out the country for personal benefit. If a president monetizes state secrets, the founder's nightmare becomes real. And that is exactly the kind of conduct impeachment was designed to address. That's why, in this scenario, the real test is not Trump's fate. It's whether the system still has teeth when the misconduct, if proven, is truly grave. If the system removes, it signals a limit exists. If the system fails, if party loyalty overrides evidence, it signals that presidential accountability is optional as long as you control enough senators. And that precedent would not belong to one party. It would belong to every future president. So what should people look for to judge whether a scenario like this is real rather than noise? Look for procedure. Procedure is harder to fake than rhetoric. Formal statements from senators that stay consistent over days, not hours. Coordination across committees, intelligence, judiciary, armed services. Bipartisan language that emphasizes process and evidence rather than emotion. References to inspector general channels and lawful reporting movement in the House, because impeachment must start there. Clear counts of committed votes, not anonymous sources say numbers, and watch how the president responds. Leaders who can defend tend to defend facts. Leaders who can't defend tend to attack people. If the response is all insults and no substance, it may mean the evidence is difficult to rebut. If the response is focused on process and classification rules, it may mean the president is trying to keep the public from seeing details. Either way, the pattern matters. The bottom line is this. A real bipartisan revolt against a sitting president would not happen over normal politics. It would happen over conduct that senators believe threatens the country and implicates the presidency itself. And if that kind of revolt ever becomes public, the presidency is no longer operating on normal political oxygen. It is operating on borrowed time, measured in votes, evidence, and whether the institution of the Senate decides it still serves the Constitution first. That's the kind of crisis where every hour matters, because once the party breaks, it rarely repairs itself quickly. And once the possibility of removal becomes credible, the presidency changes even before a single vote is cast.